Mr. President, 3.5 years ago, perhaps reasonable minds could have differed over whether Obamacare would work. Perhaps reasonable minds could have differed over whether it would cripple the economy. Perhaps reasonable minds could have differed over whether it would be devastating to millions of Americans. Mr. President, today that's no longer the case. Today, we've seen the impacts of Obamacare. We've seen what it's doing. And Obamacare is a train wreck. It is a nightmare, to use the words used by its lead Democratic author in the Senate and a union leader who previously supported Obamacare. Obamacare is the single largest job killer in this country. Obamacare is forcing Americans all over our nation into part-time work to working 29 hours a week or less. Obamacare is causing health insurance premiums to skyrocket all over this country. And Obamacare is jeopardizing the health care for millions of Americans, threatening that they will lose their health insurance altogether. It quite simply isn't working. And Mr. President, perhaps saddest of all, the United States Senate isn't listening. The Senate Democrats are not listening to the millions of Americans who are being hurt by Obamacare. If you're a young person right now coming out of school and finding door after door closed to you because small businesses aren't growing, because jobs aren't there, because we have the lowest labor force participation in decades, Senate Democrats aren't listening to you. If you're a single mom right now, perhaps waiting tables at a diner, and you're seeing your hours forcibly reduced to 29 hours a week, 29 hours a week are not enough to feed your kids. But that's what Obamacare is doing to you. And Senate Democrats aren't listening to you. If you're a recent immigrant trying to raise a young family, working hard, and seeing your health insurance premiums skyrocket, and you're wondering how on earth you're going to be able to pay these rising premiums while still meeting the needs and expenses of your young family, Senate Democrats aren't listening to you. If you're retired, if you're a person with disabilities, getting notice from your insurance carrier that the policy is going to be dropped because of Obamacare, or if you're concerned that you will be getting notice, as so many others across this country have been, Senate Democrats aren't listening to you. If you're married and on your spouse's health insurance, and you've received a notice, like 15,000 employees at UPS recently received a notice, telling them that their spousal coverage was being dropped, that their husbands and wives were losing their health insurance because of Obamacare, Senate Democrats aren't listening to you. If you're a union worker working hard to provide for your family to seek the American dream, and you're discovering that the health insurance that you like, that you've worked for, that you paid for, is going to be taken away from you because of Obamacare, Senate Democrats aren't listening to you. Now, perhaps, Mr. President, some might say, how could it be that this is happening? Surely Senate Democrats would listen to the American people if that sort of suffering were happening. Well, if you don't take my word for it, let me urge you to take the word of James Hoffa, president of the Teamsters. And I'd like to read a portion of a letter Mr. Hoffa wrote recently to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. Dear Leader Reid and Leader Pelosi, when you and the President sought our support for the Affordable Care Act, you pledged that if we liked the health plans we have now, we could keep them. Sadly, that promise is under threat. Right now, unless you and the Obama administration enact an equitable fix, Obamacare will shatter not only our hard-earned benefits, but destroy the foundation of the 40-hour work week that is the backbone of the American middle class. That's not me speaking, that's James Hoffa, the president of the Teamsters. Like millions of other Americans, our members are on the front line, are frontline workers in the American economy. We have been strong supporters of the notion that all Americans should have access to quality, affordable health care. We have also been strong supporters of you. I would note this is addressed to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. In campaign after campaign, we have put boots on the ground, gone door to door to get out the vote, run phone banks, and raised money to secure this vision, the vision of a Democratic majority in the Senate. So how is that Democratic majority in the Senate working out for union workers across this country? Well, the next sentence in this letter is, now this vision has come back to haunt us. Mr. President, I would note this is the exact same sentiment I expressed a moment ago. Senate Democrats aren't listening to you. The letter continues, time is running out. Congress wrote this law. We voted for you. We have a problem. You need to fix it. The unintended consequences of the ACA are severe. Perverse incentives are already creating nightmare scenarios. Note that word nightmare, which I started my remarks by quoting. That's not my word. That's the Teamsters describing Obamacare. Indeed, the letter concludes by saying, on behalf of millions of working men and women we represent and the families they support, we can no longer stand silent in the face of the elements of the Affordable Care Act that will destroy the very health and well-being of our members, along with millions of other hardworking Americans. Mr. President, let me note, number one, Mr. Hoffa says millions of working men and women. Not hundreds, not thousands, millions. And what does Mr. Hoffa say is happening to those millions of working men and women? That their health care is being destroyed. And destroyed is the word he used. And what answer do we get today from the Democrats in the Senate? Nothing. President Obama has granted exemptions from this failed law to big business and to members of Congress. So the friends of the administration don't have to bear the burdens of the law's collapse. But hardworking Americans, those without lobbyists, without friends in the corridors of power, they're getting no exemptions from Senate Democrats. Mr. President, that's wrong. Now, in roughly an hour, if senators vote as they have announced publicly they intend to vote, this body will vote to put back, to restore the funding for Obamacare and to gut the House continuing resolution. But the good news is the process isn't over. It's going to go back to the House of Representatives, and I salute the House for having had the courage to stand up and fight and defund Obamacare, and I remain confident, hopeful, and optimistic the House will stand their ground, will continue the fight, which means this issue is coming back to the Senate. And that is good news. That is good news, number one, for Republicans. It is unfortunate that there has been Republican division on this issue. And when it comes back to the Senate, after the House stands their ground yet again, we will have an opportunity for Republicans to come home, for Republicans to stand together. And I very much hope the next time this issue is before this body in a few days, that all 46 Republicans are united against Obamacare and standing with the American people, that we listen to the American people the way Senate Democrats are not. And let me tell you, I hope also that it's not just 46 Republicans. Our friends on the Democratic side of the aisle go home to their states, they listen to their constituents, they are hearing the suffering from the men and women who elected them. It is not easy to disagree with your political party, but at the end of the day, what we're doing here is bigger than partisan politics. What we're doing here is fighting for 300 million Americans across this great country. And so I hope when this issue comes back, when the House stands their ground and sends this back to us, that instead of just exercising brute political power, as this body is getting ready to do, I hope that Senate Democrats begin listening, that they begin listening to young people, that they begin listening to single moms, that they begin listening to immigrants, that they begin listening to people who are retired, people with disabilities, that they begin listening to married people, that they begin listening to union workers, all of whom are suffering under Obamacare. This is an opportunity for the Senate to return to the finest traditions of this body, where we listen to and fight for the American people. That hadn't happened in a long time, but I am very hopeful that we are in the process of seeing it begin to happen now. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. I note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call